And that's us live.
Okie dokie.
So, we're talking about Proudhon versus Rothbard on natural law, right?
Yeah, specifically property rights, wasn't it? Because in the
Yes.
debate I mentioned, Proudhon came up with this idea. Well, he gave this analysis of property, and one of the key themes of the book is that property has a contradictory relationship with liberty, or the promotion of freedom. On the one hand, property is good for liberty because it means the owner has a right to use the materials around them and not be hindered by external sources. But on the other hand, the non-owner becomes dominated in a way by the property owner. Now, I think it's quite easy to think of examples of if I live in your house, for example, if I come and move in for like the weekend, then I'm there on your terms. It's your rules on how the house operates, and that's okay. That's fair. When we expand that to everything is privately owned and ownership can be accumulated to infinity, and ownership rights give absolute control to these people who own the property, then you have like an economic power divergence or divide, let's say, which it runs against libertarian ideas of Proudhon, and that was the concern, and that's what I was trying to bring up in our debate before.
All right. Well, basically, we have two ethics we could have as it pertains to a property right in something. Either we give the property right to the first comer, or we give it to some late comer, right? And if it's not the first comer, then we come into all sorts of horrible contradictions. So would you say the Proudhonian ethic is a latecomer ethic as it pertains to property, i.e. some latecomer to the property has an equal or a greater claim to the property right than the first comer?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't say it's like a principle where we say the latecomer is always in the right. Like if you have a sandwich in your hand and I slap it out your hand, I don't have a greater right to that sandwich. We could even say, in terms of a house, if you and I move in together, if I move into your house, you will have a greater say on what happens to the house than I do. I think that's perfectly fine because you were the first occupier. It's use-based, really. It's based on use and occupancy. And by use, I mean physical manipulation, physical frequent manipulation. So not quite. I think some ancaps will say, "Oh, if I put the property to one side and left it there for 50 years, I'm using it by storing it." Whereas I have a more precise definition of use. It's regular physical manipulation of the thing.
All right. Well, would you say that I'm currently using my monitor?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have to like literally be touching the thing.
No. Yeah.
All right. So then, what counts as a use then? Am I not using my house when I'm going out for some bread?
It will depend very much on property in question, as in like what type of property is it? Is it a house? Well, if it's a house, then you'll have to make allowances, obviously, for going out to the shops or going on holiday and things like that. They'll say just you having that as your usual sort of romping grounds is you using the house. If you move to a different house, then we'll say, well, it's not yours anymore. But there is grey area, and I can see where you'd be coming from with regards to holiday homes. I'm in favour of holiday homes. I think holiday homes are fine. So if I have a home in France and I go there once a year, I think that's fine.
Right. So this is, seeming quite arbitrary. Or is there some manner of algorithm we could apply to any given property right to know how extensive that property right is in this domain, right? How frequently must I use a spade before it no longer becomes my spade, or a house before it no longer becomes my house? Right? How does the Proudhonian solve this conundrum?
Yeah, I don't think we could possibly come to any objective, definite conclusion. Like it's like, what was that thought experiment with how many grains of sand does something need to be to make it into a dune? You know, it's one of those
Continuum problem.
problems of like, yeah, that's the one.
Right. But I mean, this seems like a continuum you're forcing yourself into. It seems a lot easier just to bite the bullet and say, well, it doesn't. There is no arbitrary, like, because I don't see the principal difference. For there to be a genuine continuum problem, there needs to be some difference in principle between one end of the continuum and the other end, and we just don't have a way of defining where exactly that change principle takes place, right? Whereas here, I don't see a genuine difference in principle between storing a spade for 5,000 years in your shed and storing it for 5 seconds.
Well, one's difference is going to be just how are you actually using the thing, and we can again I refer back to actual physical manipulation of the thing in question, and just because there isn't a objective, straightforward line we can draw, it doesn't mean there's no way this thing can work. Like we have.
I can accept that there, are continuum problems in philosophy, and, you couldn't find a hard set line that, let's say, shining a torch on somebody's property as opposed to shining some several gigawatt beam, which immediately destroys their house, right? It seems like that's some sort of a continuum problem, but the difference in principle between those two cases is one isn't damaging the house and one very clearly is. But I don't see that same difference in principle between the two ends of the storage continuum, between storing a spade for 5 seconds and storing it for 5,000 years. Right? I don't see why there would be a difference in principle there.
Well, with that one there, we'd just say, well, the difference is you are using it. You in your lifetime, we can even say you are using this spade, and one where you stored it for 5,000 years, you're not going to touch it ever again.
What if I want to have it as like some sort of family heirloom, though? I want to pass this on to my children in case they might ever need to use a spade in the future.
So, is it? I think with storage, it ought to be in a home or a designated home or storage unit. If I just chucked it to the side in the road, so it's in the grass verge, I wouldn't consider the property claim to be valid. But if you put it in somewhere in your house, it just says, right, that's just there for my kids.
Right, so
property which would be easy to defend, right?
You have to put some sort of effort into showing, hey, I'm keeping this for later. I'm not abandoning this. I mean, that seems relatively fine. But if I am, like, stop putting it in a box in my shed, and I keep it there for like 5,000 years, would it still be my spade, or does it seed into nature after some certain point?
It'll have to, wouldn't it? Because
but why?
It's in the shed for 5,000 years. No one's using it. It's not affecting your life if someone does use it, because it exceeds your life.
But it might, right? Because what if the second somebody starts using it, a problem comes up where I need to have a hold dog, and then, the spade's been degraded by all these other punters coming through and using the spade. Now I don't have my spade anymore. It doesn't work as well. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the point of storage is you don't know whether or not you'll need that spade again in the future, but you might. So you're planning that, well, there might be some problem cropping up in the future where I need this capital good, so I'm going to keep it around.
Yeah, like if you put the spade in your shed, that's perfectly fine. But like the tack-on was 1,000 years. Now, if I die and I said I've written in my will, I want this spade to remain in the shed for 5,000 years, I would probably say that should be ignored.
What if you're just saying, I want this spade to pass on to my children, and your children then also store it, and they don't end up ever digging any holes with it, and then they're like, well, my children might need to use it, and so on and so forth. for like 5,000 years worth of many generations, where it
Yeah.
just doesn't crop up a need for this spade to dig any holes, or I don't know, like beat a raccoon or whatever you use a spade for, right?
Yeah. As long as it's stored in a reasonable area, like in a shed or in your house or whatever, as long as it's stored there and you're making an active effort to show that, yeah, this is our spade, we put it to one side and we'll use it in future, or we'll use it if we need to, that's fine. But abandonment will go to, like, if I just threw the spade out of an aeroplane and then it landed somewhere in the Sahara Desert, are we really going to defend that guy's property claim if he comes back 30 years later and says, hey, that's my spade, I threw that out the plane 30 years ago, and they're just there digging it to, I don't know, fucking grow a farm in the Sahara Desert? It's a weird example, but I just came up with it.
Well, there certainly is such a thing as abandonment, and, you know, if you come across anything which you think is abandoned, you are wagering that it is genuinely abandoned, and that, you know, they aren't just keeping it there for later, right? But that's always going to be a wager, right? Because you don't know with certainty that it might be that they've just nipped out for a while, and then they're going to come back to their spade and start digging a hole.
Yeah. So, let's say in our hypothetical, with just chucking out the plane, ignore the fact I just said it was a desert. Forget it's a desert. It's some plains. 30 years later, he comes back. He sees a village, and people in the village are using that spade to dig farms, dig up things for a farm. I would say he no longer has a property title over that claim, over that spade, and the people using it have a superior title to it.
I mean, on what grounds? Because are we assuming that he was actually storing it, or are we assuming that he was intending to abandon it, but then changed his mind later?
He just threw it out the plane. He might not have been thinking about it. He might have just been drunk and threw it out the plane.
Right, and, you know, maybe, let's say I was drunk one day and I fucking threw out some wedding ring or something, some real valuable family heirloom, and then I wake up in the morning and like, oh shit, I fucking threw that out, and then I go on this journey for 30 years looking for my heirloom. Would you not say that I still own it, right?
I would question that. I would question it. Like, if someone found the ring and they're wearing the ring, yeah, you have lost it, in my opinion. Yeah.
I mean, I you know, I just dropped it. You know, I have butterfingers or whatever, and I dropped it, and then I'm spending all this time and effort to try and get my ring back. Right? I've clearly not abandoned it there. If I had abandoned it, then I wouldn't bother. I would have just said, who cares? Right?
Yeah, I agree. You as the owner haven't abandoned it. But your claim has withered away, let's say, because of your absence, and then someone else has come across it, assumed, well, you've over-wagered whether or not someone else is looking for it. Now they're using it, and let's say
that's the thing. Their wager didn't pay off because they were wagering that it was abandoned, but we agreed that I hadn't abandoned it. I was looking for it. I just lost it, but I hadn't abandoned it. I was looking for it all this time, and it just took me 30 years to find it.
Yeah. But I still say the property claim is withered away because it's not using. Because my property claim is based on, my property ethics rather, is based on physical use and manipulation. And over the course of 30 years, he wasn't doing so.
But then,
so the
how do I retain ownership of the spade, which is being stored in my shed? Then, because I'm not actually physically using it, I'm keeping it for later.
It's being stored on a. It's been. I'd say storage is a use. It's tricky with what the limits of that are with the continuing problem. But if it's in the shed, and it's just a shed that's on your property, it's I think that's fine.
I mean, if the determinant for whether or not somebody's allowed to come in is whether or not it's abandoned, right? But we agree that I haven't abandoned that family heirloom ring. Right, I clearly haven't because I've spent all this effort to try and get it back. I mean, that's not an abandoned thing.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be some declaration saying I have abandoned this now. Again, it's based on physical manipulation and use of the thing, and storage on reasonable grounds.
Then, if I'm just like walking along the road, then I drop my ring on the ground, and then somebody like snatches it up off the ground, is that not analogous to me dropping out of the plane and taking 30 years to find it? As it, here I would have taken me like 5 seconds to bend over, pick it up again. Right? What's the actual principal difference between this situation and when it takes me 30 years to find it?
The time. The time is the difference. Yeah.
But how does the time make for any sort of principal difference here?
You're not going to, again, continuing problem, you're not going to find a perfect line, but 30 years versus 5 seconds is a substantial amount of time, isn't it? To make a difference.
Right, but I mean...
It's actually an ethical difference, right?
But it might be a substantial amount of time, but I don't see how that actually makes it a disanalogy between dropping the ring and taking 5 seconds to pick it up versus dropping it from a very high height and then needing to spend 30 years scouring the desert for it. Right? I'm putting more effort into finding it in the latter case, I would say, but why does that make it disanalogous?
I'd say, well, again, the time difference has very real material impacts on the property claims themselves. So, for example, I throw the spade out of the plane and I come back 30 years later, and that spade has been used to produce, it's used to help build a farm. The things that they've done with that spade is, it's helped them in some substantial way. Whereas the guy who's lost a spade, okay, he's lost a spade, but he's had 30 years without the spade. Is them using the spade hasn't actually impacted on his life whatsoever.
I mean, we don't know how many great things he could have done if he had the spade, right? Because he didn't have the spade. That sounds like it would just justify all theft. If I come into your house and I take your TV, and it takes you like 30 years to track me down, I'm like, well, I mean, you haven't been using this TV the whole time, mate. It doesn't seem like you're missing it that much. But it's like, well, no, I was missing it because I spent 30 years trying to track it down, right? So give me my fucking TV back.
Yeah. So with the theft of the TV, a property right has been broken. There's implicit.
Then how has, because your justification for taking the desert ring was that, well, in all this time, they weren't using the ring in all these 30 years, so therefore it can't have been that important because it took them 30 years and they didn't have it, right? Similarly, if I take your TV and it takes you 30 years to track me down, in that entire time where you didn't have the TV, you weren't using the TV, right? This is an analogous situation.
No, it's not, because it's disanalogous because the ring was found absentee, with its owner being absent, and the television was taken from someone's home. The TV actually was stolen, whereas the ring was found. I wouldn't like. Are we going to say if you pick up a spade in the desert as it's being thrown out from an airplane, if you pick it up and use it, is that theft?
It is if it's not abandoned property, right? Because you were trying to exclude the owner from their property. That's theft. And you're saying the reason why it isn't theft is because the owner didn't have access to it for 30 years. So therefore, it was abandoned. But similarly with your TV, you didn't have access to it for 30 years. So does that not make your TV abandoned?
No, hang on. So are you going to bite the bullet and say the guy could come back after 30 years and then sue the people in the village for using a spade without his permission?
Yes.
Really?
Yep.
Right. That's... What would the punishment be then?
Restitution and retribution. So, I would say there wouldn't be mens rea here because they were... Actually, I think there might still be mens rea. Yeah. So basically, they would have to, pay him back for, whatever degradation had happened to the spade, right? They'd have to give him the spade back if it wasn't degraded at all. It's a really good spade. Didn't degrade in this time. So they'd have to give him the spade back because he still owns the fucking spade, and he would be allowed to take a spade from them.
Right. I think that is that's a big bullet to bite. I think. I got to get a bunch of people just found a spade used it, and now they're being punished for picking up and using it. Oh, I've just got something at the. I'll be 1 second. Just give us this. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So where were we? So these people they've just found a spade, and now they're being punished for it.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't their spade. I could say, well, I just found this TV. You know, maybe it had just been delivered to your house. And I was like, oh, cool, a TV on the pavement. I want this. And then I pick it up and then I take it, right?
Yeah, but a parcel being on someone's right outside someone's house, there is obvious ownership there, isn't there? I'm stealing a parcel that was just been delivered to your house. Right. Whereas a spade in the middle of nowhere, but then being used to help develop a community.
So maybe you could argue that because they assumed that the spade was abandoned, that they weren't knowingly doing the criminal action, but they'd still have to give the spade back, right? Because it's still the guy's spade, right? Because he's been trying to find the spade.
I can see if your position was they just own the spade back, that's more reasonable. I'm not shocked by that. But what I am shocked by is the fact that they also need to be punished for using that spade.
Well, that's basically the question of whether or not there was mens rea. So, proportionality is, in natural law, is basically retribution plus restitution. So, the retribution comes in if you knowingly did something criminal. So, you know, if I see you on the street and I punch you in the face, you'd be allowed to punch me back, because I wouldn't be able to consistently hold that you're not allowed to do that to me. Restitution is basically, I take $5 from you, I have to give that $5 back to you, right? Because you still owe them that $5. So for here, they'd still definitely have to give the spade back, because they still committed the crime of taking the spade. They wouldn't be allowed to exclude the guy from the spade. And if they did try to exclude the guy from the spade, then they would have mens rea.
Right. So, and you said they need to give the spade back.
Definitely.
Plus damages to the spade.
Yeah.
And if they then say no, as in we say, well, we don't think those damages are. Oh, no, doctors will. Oh, cat, go away. Give us a second again. This is getting stupid. Apologies again. So someone came into the room, talked to me, then didn't close the door properly. Now the cat walked in. Right. Anyways,
did they take your TV whilst they were there?
Yeah, they did. They own it now. No. So where were we?
So I'm saying they take the spade. They assumed it was abandoned, and then you say, "Hey, give me my spade back," and then they say, "No, we're going to keep the spade." Then they are knowingly doing something which is criminal, i.e. they are knowingly excluding the owner from their property. So in that case, there would definitely be mens rea, so retribution would definitely be just.
And obviously, defend property rights, it could always extend to lethal force.
Well, yes, they could, the owner of the spade could attempt to take the spade back via the gentlest means, and, you know, that might include lethal force.
So, spades, just to go through it again. Spades dropped out from a plane, been picked up by some people. They've used that spade for 30 years. They've built a community with it. The owner has refound the spade, and he said to them, "I want it back."
Yep.
Plus damages. They agree to give him the spade back, but they don't agree on the damages.
Well,
and now he starts. Then he starts going around trying to loot, expropriate different bits of their treasury. I don't know. He takes some apples. He takes some gold coins or whatever.
I should be
They tried to
clear
stop
about
him.
what the damages would be. The damages would be what is required to repair the spade back to the condition it was in when they took it from him. Right, that would be what the damages would be.
Okay, so
you know,
it might cost £5 to get it mended.
yeah, he'd be allowed to
And
take
he'd look-
£5 from them.
And use lethal force if necessary.
Yep.
I can't get on board with that. I don't know how to articulate it exactly.
Let's
Doesn't
look
that
at.
just sound evil to you?
Absolutely not. Let's look at the reverse of that. Let's say you don't owe damages on property you take. Let's say I go to your house and I find some very valuable, like a Qing Dynasty vase that your family has had for generations, right? This is a priceless artifact. I take this vase from you and I go away, and then I get back home and I smash it with a hammer, and then I'm saying, well, I'll give you the vase back, but I'm not going to pay damages for repairing the vase, right? So then you've just got a pile of broken crockery, right? That seems far more horrible than me being able to be forced to repair the vase.
So I stole the vase from you.
Yes.
I smashed
Well,
it on
I
the floor.
I think I stole the vase from you. And I'm saying I don't want to pay any
Right.
damages for stealing the vase, Maybe I even kicked in your door, and I'm saying, well, I didn't take the door from you, right? So I'm not going to pay to repair your door, right? This basically, you're asserting that vandalism is legal, essentially.
Yeah, but we are the disanalogy there. You can accuse me of begging the question, but the disanalogy is that the property claims of the door, the vase, the home are far superior, far stronger than the property claim of over the spade that's been chucked out the airplane. It's now in the desert, but now it's in the middle of nowhere.
I mean, how is it?
That
How
would
are
be
they
the
far
disanalogy.
superior? Because in both cases, we agree that it wasn't abandoned at all. Right? 'Cause if it was abandoned, then yeah, you don't have a property right in it anymore.
Mhm.
But I
So
mean, property
this-
rights don't like vanish over time, right? If I own a gold brick and I pass it to my children, they pass it to their children, so on and so forth. It doesn't slowly degrade this property claim, right? It doesn't go away after some arbitrary amount of time. It's still, you still
It
have a
does if
property
they're
right in it.
absent. It does if they're absent, yeah.
I mean,
It
why?
would have to. Well, because if it's we need to sort of get back to why property rights are
Yeah,
necessary
I do
in
have.
the first place. Because we are just I think whatever answer I give, we're not going to agree with it unless we agree on why property
Yeah,
rights are.
this might be a good segue into getting down what exactly it means to have a property right. So, in modern Rothbardian natural law theory, a property right is a conflict-avoiding norm, and the reason why this is such a good definition of a property right is that it's undeniable. You cannot propose an ethic which is contrary to conflict avoidance. You cannot propose a conflict initiation ethic because you'd find yourself in contradiction. So this is why it's very good as a foundation for your theory of property rights. Any other theory of property rights would be arbitrary at best and contradictory, therefore false at worst.
Okay. So, and my alternative is property rights are necessary because people need to use and occupy materials around them in order to live. So if you keep slapping sandwiches out of my hand, I'm eventually going to starve to death. So that is, and property rights need to be based on those kinds of things. In the first place, that's why property is good.
So it's basically, well, I think this is just kind of an inferior way to phrase conflict avoidance, right? It's property rights are necessary because people need to utilize means in order to, further their life, right? But that's basically just saying, well, a property right means that others aren't allowed to initiate conflict because, slapping the sandwich out your hand, that's initiating a conflict over the use of that sandwich, right? So it's we go back into conflict avoidance.
I wouldn't use conflict avoidance as the outline principle because I think it's not just conflict avoidance. There's got to be more to it because the property rights serve the purpose of me being able to freely manipulate land without hindrance. Now, let's talk about this idea of conflict avoidance then. So, conflict avoidance, from what I've heard from you and from what I've read from other ancaps, is a difference of mean. Conflict is a difference of means about a given object. So if you want to drive the car to Liverpool, I want to drive to Manchester, we have a conflict over the
Yeah,
car.
I'll give my definition of conflict is contradictory action, i.e., the action of one person is excluding the other from acting in that way. So the example, when we apply this to a means of, say, a stick, is, Crusoe is trying to use it. He wants to use it for spearfishing. Friday wants to use it for stoking his fire. They can't both use the stick in this way at the same time. So this would be contradictory interaction.
Yeah. And then conflict is caused when the means, someone decides that they want to apply a means to the object which is contradictory to the other person, to another person.
Yes, that would be the initiation of the conflict.
That's initiation. So, yeah. So the reason why I don't like that is because let's say I come to Scotland and we go on the most fantastic night out in Glasgow. It's so fantastic, I end up losing my trousers. Okay? And because you're a nice guy, you say, look, Thorpe, you can have my trousers just for the day whilst we walk around the museums in Glasgow. Then you say, right, we're in the middle of a museum, looking at some paintings and whatnot, and then you say, right, Thorpe, I want those trousers to be round your ankles. I say, no, that's ridiculous. Who's initiated the conflict there?
You have, because they're my trousers.
So, but I'd say though, we started off having an agreed means, agreed use for these trousers, and that was for me to wear them as I'm going around Glasgow with you. Then you've changed your mind, and now your ends have changed. To me, you're the one who has initiated the conflict because you have changed your mind on what I'm allowed to do with them. You're the ones who's...
I would say this is easily solvable with a contract. So we could have a contract where it's, okay, Thoughtbat is allowed to use these trousers for a day, so long as he doesn't do X, Y, and Z. If he does X, Y, and Z, he immediately takes off the trousers and it pays me like $20, right? And the counter side to that would be, and if I try and get Thoughtbat to do X, Y, Z with the trousers, then I cede ownership of the trousers to Thoughtbat, right? And then if I try and get you to put the trousers around your ankles, then I would immediately initiate that punishment clause of ceding the trousers to you, so you now own the trousers. So now if I try to make you put them around your ankles, then I would be initiating conflict because they're now your trousers.
Yeah, well, how about let's pretend we're normal people and we don't sign contracts when I borrow your trousers. Because, be honest, mate, no one's going to do that. They're just not going to sign a contract over...
Well, you don't have to sign a contract, it can be verbal. So I can give you an example, actually. I was in the casino the other week, and some guy said, hey, he liked my shirt, so he was like, hey, he was like some bigwig CEO guy, and he was on a fucking bachelor party. And he was like, I want to play some poker with you. So he gave me $40, and he said, hey, I'll give you $40 if you play poker with me. That's a contract. He has transferred that £40 to me on the condition that I play some poker with him. So I was obliged to play some poker with him. Right? That is a contract which has just arisen out of the nature of conversation. So it's still a contract. I didn't sign anything, right? But I still had a contract with him.
Yeah. But if I borrow your trousers, it's very unlikely that I'm going to go through a list of things that you can't tell me to do with those trousers on me and say, right, you can't make me pull them down. You can't make me get my knob out through the flies. You can't make me do this. We don't talk that way. So when I haven't signed the contract, we haven't gone through everything that you can't tell me to do with those trousers. Then we're out in Glasgow and you tell me to do a really absurd thing with them. I have to do it because they're your trousers.
Yeah, I mean, or you could, give me back my trousers, right? It's your loss, right? Sometimes things suck in life. Sometimes people are assholes. The law isn't there to make sure that nobody's ever an asshole to anybody ever. It's there to solve the very real problem of how do we deal with disputes over, because we live in a world of scarcity. Scarcity implies that there's the possibility for conflict. So we need to resolve this. This is what the law is for.
But I wouldn't say lethal force, and defense of property rights can extend to that. I wouldn't say lethal force would ever be justified for you to rip the trousers off me whilst we're in public.
I mean, why not, right? If you're trying to essentially, let's say, let's take an easier example. I'm coming into your house, and I've opened up your safe, and I start taking all your gold bars and shit, right? I don't know if mutualists are gold bugs or not, but it seems to fit, yeah. So I start taking all your gold bars, and you're like, hey, get the fuck out of here. That's my gold. I'm like, suck it, bitch. And I start walking out, and the only way for you to actually get me to return those gold bars is to start shooting at me, right? You have a gun, because we're living in anarchist land here. You point the gun at me and saying, give me those fucking gold bars, or you're out of here. And then I just start walking away. The only way for you, let's just say you've been injured or something, so you can't chase after me, you can't tackle me. You wouldn't be able to, like, physically wrestle the gold bars off of me. Would you not be allowed to shoot me to get your gold bars back?
Yeah, you would be. You would.
Right, so that is lethal force is therefore justified in defense of property rights.
Oh, yeah. My objection wasn't lethal force is never justified in any case. I think lethal force is perfectly justified in terms of your home and things like that. But it has to be contextual, and there has to be limitations with property enforcement when it comes to someone else is using the thing. I'm using the trousers. You've given permission to use the trousers, and that we're in public. I really don't want to have to pull my trousers down, or pull your trousers down, and now you're shooting at me. So, and this was a segue back from what is conflict initiation. I think you've initiated the conflict because our means about the thing have changed. Now, I don't think you've initiated the conflict, therefore you're wrong. I think there is times where it is justified for you to initiate conflict. So, for example, if I'm in your home, and then you decide that I'm not welcome there anymore, you can tell me to get out. I'd say you've initiated the conflict, but you're right to do so. It's your home.
I've not initiated the conflict there because I have the property right. And if there's a conflict over anything, and we use the property right to determine which one is the initiator of the conflict. Property rights arise out of conflict initiation in this way. So, this is how we derive the homestead principle, right? So, Crusoe on Friday, they've got the stick, right? Crusoe takes the stick out of nature, he snaps it off a tree or whatever, he sharpens it up, and then he's going off, and he wants to start spearfishing. And then Friday comes over, and he tries to snatch the stick away to use for stoking his fire. Basically, because of the causal nature of the universe, we know that Friday is the one who has initiated the conflict over the use of that stick, because he's the latecomer, and the latecomer is the one who is the initiator of conflict. So we describe this in easier terms, so we don't have to go through this whole rigmarole every time, by saying that Crusoe has the property right. So i.e. if there's a conflict over any property, the person with the property right cannot be the person who initiated the conflict, because that would contradict with the very definition of what a property right is. A property right is assigned to the person who is the non-initiator of conflict.
This seems very circular to me. So,
well, it's absolutely not.
Let me show you. We've said that property rights are necessary for conflict avoidance. But you're now defining conflict avoidance as respecting property rights. So, if we bunk it in, we say property rights are necessary to respect property rights. Do you see the problem?
No. Basically, property rights have arisen out of the need for conflict avoidance. So, we define property rights on the
need for property rights. Because you're defining conflict avoidance as respect for property rights. That's the definition. Because unless there's a
No,
time
no, I'm
where
defining conflict avoidance as conflict avoidance. That is the root there, right? It's
well, hang on. When I ask you who initiates a conflict, you said it's always the non-owner.
right,
Now,
because that's the definition of ownership. That's how I'm defining property rights. Property rights are defined on the basis of conflict avoidance. Conflict is defined as contradictory action.
but
I'm not defining conflict avoidance in terms of property rights, I'm defining it the other way around. Property rights are defined in terms of conflict, and conflict is defined in terms of action, which is the root, it's the praxeologic root of property rights.
it's no, your standard conflict. I know you're saying it is. It's not based on action. It's based on property rights.
It's
Because-
absolutely not. You've misunderstood me if that's what you think I'm saying. I'm not defining property rights. I'm not defining conflict in terms of property rights. I'm defining property rights in terms of conflict. Property rights are defined. A property right over something is defined as the person who is the non-initiator. They have the property right. That's why I say property rights are conflict-avoiding norms.
But look, we've got two people, A and B. A owns a shirt. A owns a shirt. A and B agree on how that shirt is going to be used. It doesn't matter how it's used. It's immaterial to the question. A, the owner, decides he doesn't want to do that anymore. They haven't signed a contract because they're normal people. They haven't discussed it in detail. A says A has now changed his mind on how he wants the shirt to be used. So I say A has initiated the conflict. He has contradicted the ends which he agreed upon with B.
Promises aren't really legally binding, right? I could promise to marry you, and we agree to get married, and then I can change my mind later. I haven't violated your rights by doing that. I haven't initiated conflict with you. Similarly, we can agree for you to use my shirt, but then I might, change my mind later. Doesn't mean I've initiated a conflict with you, because I still own the shirt.
Yeah, so again, you haven't I'll repeat it. You haven't initiated conflict with me because you own the shirt. You're defining conflict in terms of property rights.
But that's no,
why it's circular.
I've defined ownership in such a way that it's assigned to the person who's not initiating conflict. So therefore, by definition, I didn't. Under the assumption that I have the property right over the shirt, therefore I couldn't have initiated conflict, because that's what it means to own something.
Again, but whenever I say, okay, who initiates the conflict, you say it depends on who owns it.
Mm-hmm. Or we could go back to that's just to make it easier to talk about, right? Because whoever initiated the conflict is the person who has initiated the conflict, right? It's the person who has started the contradictory interaction. That is the person who initiated the conflict.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's my position. But I know you're saying that, but in practice, when we come to these hypotheticals, you're not using that standard. You're
absolutely. It's just far harder to talk about it in such low-level terms. It's easier to talk about it in terms of property rights. That's why we have these abstractions. It makes it easier to discuss the topic.
What you say is the one who makes the ends contradictory, the one who decides who changes his mind on, who breaks the agreement. Let's say A and B say the property is to be used in this way.
Breaking an agreement doesn't make it contradictory action, because I can change my mind and say, you know what, actually, I want that shirt back, and then you could say, right, fine, and then you give me my shirt back. That isn't contradictory action. It would be contradictory action if you said, no, I'm not actually going to give you your shirt back. I'm going to keep it instead. That is contradictory action. Well, we both are wanting to use the shirt in different ways, and you are excluding me from it. You have initiated the conflict there, because I am the initial possessor of it, right? I am the one who has homesteaded that shirt or traded it with somebody who has, right? That is why you are the initiator of the conflict. You are the latecomer to that shirt. Therefore, you have initiated the conflict. Therefore, you don't have the property right over it.
Not quite. I would say, again, I know you've used different words for property right there. You talked about homesteading, you talked about being the first possessor. But A and B, one moment, agree on the means and the ends for the shirt. And then A is the one who breaks that, who is the one who brings the contradictory action into it. He decides to contradict the interests of B, and he has initiated the conflict. Now, whether or not he is justified to do so is immaterial.
No. You were never justified in initiating conflict. That's my point. Because that is the basis of legal theory.
Because if you come to my house and then I say, right, okay, you can stay the night, and then I tell you to get out at 3 a.m., I'm the one who's initiated the conflict.
Absolutely not. There would only be a conflict there if I decided to stay instead. Then because I'm the latecomer, right? I don't have the property right in that house. I'm the one who's initiating the conflict. It's causality. It's just that I am the initiator of the conflict. It's very much like Crusoe and Friday with their stick. Friday is the initiator of the conflict, quite obviously there, because he's the latecomer. And a latecomer ethic is contradictory, so therefore false. So it has to be the first comer who has priority here.
Conflict comes about when there's disagreement on how a thing's going to be. We're going around in circles a little bit, but I'll just try one more time. A, the owner, has... That's right, 1 minute, they both have the same use for the shirt. There's no conflict. The next moment, E is not changing his mind on what he wants to do with that object, but A, the owner, is. A, the owner, is the one who's brought in the contradictory action. B's just saying, no, I want to hold, I want to carry on doing the thing that we agreed I can do. But A has said, well, no, I've changed my mind. I want to do something else with that shirt. So
that's the problem. It couldn't be the latecomer who is not initiating conflict, because that is contradictory. So, via the law of non-contradiction, the negation has to be the case. The first comer has to be the person who's not initiating conflict, and latecomers have to be the initiators of conflict, because we're looking for truth here, not contradiction.
I agree with. We don't want it to be contradictory. I'm just saying, in reality, it was the person who owns it who's broken the agreement. He's changed the means. He's changed his mind.
Yeah, he's changed his mind over something that he is the just possessor of, though. And that's the point. Because he is the just possessor of it, it's the unjust possessor who is trying to possess it. And this is presupposed by anybody who has a conflict over anything, by the way. The latecomer presupposes that mere possession is not the same as ownership, because they are saying that, well, the other person shouldn't have possession of it. I should have possession of it. But, if that's the case, then they're also saying that if another latecomer came and tried to take it off them, that would be unjust. So they're saying that the latecomer ethic isn't actually the just way of doing things. So they have contradicted themselves by trying to assert this latecomer ethic, whilst disagreeing with it, actually. This is why the latecomer ethic is impossible to propose without contradiction. So it has to be false. Therefore, we're left with the first comer ethic.
I agree that the first comer can be justified in breaking the agreement. I agree that he is the just possessor, but you're tying conflict. You're tying the question of who initiated the conflict with who is the owner. They are the same question, right?
Because we need to know who the just possessor is, because there's a dispute over who should have possession of this house.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to know
And
who
then
the
you
just
say-
possessor is.
Yeah, and then you say, well, it's down to conflict avoidance. Well, what's conflict avoidance? It depends who's the owner. Well, how do you determine who owns things?
Conflict initiation is essentially the latecomer ethic. It's saying that, well, it's just to come in as a latecomer and try and wrestle possession of someone. It's related in this way. So, just possession here is what we need to get down. And we agree that the just possessor is the first comer rather than the latecomer.
Yeah. The just possessor, again, you're still asking the same question when you ask who initiated the conflict, who is the unjust possessor, isn't it? And when before you said it's the person who makes the means contradictory. So to me that means A decides to change his mind on how he uses the shirt. That would be the initiation of conflict in that case, because it is A who has decided to make.
No, because it is B who's initiated the conflict by not going along with this new decision by A. You know, he wants B to wear it backwards, say, and B says, "No, I want to wear it forwards." That's saying, "No, I want to wear it forwards," trying to exclude A, the first comer. That is the initiation of conflict there. Not A changing his mind, because just changing your mind about things isn't initiation of conflict. It's actually trying to exclude the first comer from it. That is initiation of conflict. Right, because we're talking about action, not thought here.
Conflict is when you have contradictory ends about a thing.
Conflict is contradictory action in general.
Yeah, so you and I have contradictory action, want to take contradictory action on an object. If at first we agree on what the action is going to be and we both follow through with it, and then the owner decides to deviate from that agreement, he has made the action contradictory.
No, he hasn't. It's still not contradictory when the owner just says, "Hey, I want you to wear the shirt backwards now." Right? The contradictory action would come into play when the non-owner says, "Nah, I don't want to. I'm going to exclude you from this shirt." That exclusion is when there is conflict, not just the owner saying his new plan with the shirt. That isn't creating any exclusion, right? And the owner is in fact allowed to exclude others from his shirt.
Yeah, he is. Depending on whether or not he is a just owner.
But we're assuming he is, because we're saying he's the owner, so therefore he is the just possessor. That's the definition of ownership.
Yes, he's. I'm not. I don't want to spend too long on this. I've got some other points I'd like to bring up. So, my last go at trying to understand this. The owner of a shirt cannot initiate conflict because he owns a shirt.
Yes, by definition.
By definition.
It's just like
Definition of what?
if we define y as being equal to x, then y can't not equal x. Because we defined y as being equal to x. Right? That's just the definition. We define the owner we define the owner as the just possessor. So therefore, it can't be the case that the owner is the unjust possessor.
Right, okay. So I can't get on board with the with your view on conflict avoidance and of conflict initiation, because I've gone through it several times. It's just not going down for me. I'm not too sure if I can accurately articulate exactly what's wrong with it.
We could go into at the start. You said something about property has a contradictory relationship with freedom. So property is good for freedom as the owner has the right to use the property and not be hindered. But then non-owners are dominated by the owner. So would you say that in the Proudhonian definition, property isn't the core? And if not, then what is the core of Proudhon's theory of law?
Core. Proudhon is a bit of a weirdo. He would have just been pretty utilitarian, I think. Not utilitarian, but he used very vague ideas like justice and equality and things like that. He's not like Rothbard, where he says, right, this is the principle, and we're going to apply this principle to every possible outcome. He's just a typical economist. He just looks at contradictions, says, right, this is a contradictory relationship in economics of a day. This is how it can be resolved. There's no core to Proudhon's ethics. That's why I don't say my ethics are Proudhonian. I'm more of a Stirnerite. So my core is myself. The core of my ethics is my self-interest. But don't need to get into that just now. Let's look at the idea of domination by property owner. The hypothetical I wanted to bring up was A and B live adjacent to one another, and B buys all the fields around A, and the road they're on. So in order for A to leave his property and go to work or go to the shops or anything like that, he needs B's permission. And to me, I'd say B is in a place of dominance over A, because for A to be able to continue living or do the things he needs to do to live, he needs to do it on B's permission.
Well, I'd say that B is engaged in an act known as forestalling there, so this is a crime.
So, what's a crime?
So, basically, if we imagine a sort of donut homestead, right? So, there's some land in the middle of the donut and some land outside. If we assume that it's possible, the donut's almost complete. If we assume that it's possible for the donut homesteader to homestead that last segment of the donut, we find a contradiction in our theory of property rights. And I'll get up the paper now, which has the syllogism. Give me a moment. Here we go. I'll send this to you as well. So yeah, so I've got it up on screen now. I'll just screenshot this and send it to you.
Okay.
So yeah, we have this sort of donut homestead. A is the donut, B is the inside of the donut, and C is the land outside of the donut. So we assume that the donut homesteader actually owns the entire donut, right? So we call this person Red, I believe, here. So then we ask, what does it mean for Red and Blue's property rights? So, 1, because Red is not the owner of the inside of the donut, he does not have any rights to that inside of the donut. So anybody outside the donut cannot have any correlative duties towards Red in connection with the center. But because he has no correlative duties towards Red in connection to the center, he does not have any duty to not enter the center. But because Red is the owner of the donut, Blue has correlative duties towards Red in connection with the donut. Because Blue has these duties towards him, he has duties to not enter the donut. But because Duty has no duty to not enter the inside of the donut, he also has no duty to not cross the donut, right? But because of the bagel shape of the land, to enter the inside is to cross the donut. So he both does and doesn't have the duty to not enter the donut segment, which is a contradiction. And this contradiction arises because we assume that it's possible to homestead the entire donut. If it's not possible to homestead that tiny last segment, then we don't have this contradiction. So this is how we arrive at the Blockian proviso. So it is forestalling to try and assert ownership over such a donut homestead.
So, the example I gave wasn't homesteading. It was just buying. It was purchasing.
There
land
must have
one
been
at a
some
time.
homesteading assumed for some band of homesteading completely surrounding A's property. That must have been prior assumed to have been valid, right? But that
yeah,
assumption
so-
leads to a contradiction, is what I'm saying. So that it's not possible to homestead in this way around a person.
Yeah, I can understand that. I understand all property at some point was homesteaded, and that's fine. So I'm saying roads can be privately owned, fields can be privately owned, and houses can be privately owned. Right? Now we've gone from a point where fields, the road, and the homes were all owned by different people, and then gradually B has bought out fields and then the road. Has B committed a crime here?
The crime is in asserting that he owns that final slice of the donut. He would have to allow an easement over the donut, right? Because it wasn't actually all homesteaded. There is at least one path remaining outside of A's property. Because it's not possible to homestead all around A's property.
Right.
So, he has to allow for an easement over this donut that he owns.
So, let's say the final piece to the puzzle of this donut is the road. So, as soon as he buys the road from C, he then has to allow...
as soon as C starts asserting his control of that road, he would already be having to allow for some sort of an easement, right? And then B would essentially buy into this easement.
Why would he? Why would C have to allow...
It's a lot like the
Basically,
donut. So we can imagine that each segment of the donut is owned by a different person. Then some final guy comes in and homesteads the last slice. He hasn't genuinely homesteaded that entire last slice, because then he is forestalling the middle. So you'd have to allow for people to walk over his property, because he's the final guy in this puzzle here.
Right. Go through why that is again. So,
because otherwise it leads to a contradiction in our homesteading theory. This is kind of deep in the weeds of property rights, but I would encourage you to read that paper afterwards. Obviously, you can't read it on air, but that's my current opinion, is that it is a crime to engage in this forestalling.
okay, fair enough. So, and even if the road, the fields were all owned by different people, that was ordered. If all those different property owners excluded A, from leaving his property and entering onto their property, that would be a crime as well.
Only the final person who has homesteaded this final slice of the donut. And there's also the reductio case. I can't actually remember. I think if they all simultaneously homesteaded, then they're all engaged in criminal action. But if it's one after the other, then it's only the final person to homestead it. He brings up an analogy from American football, I think it is. He addresses this later on in the paper.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So if we zoom out, we've effectively got, it's not just that hole in the donut, but the donut itself is also surrounded by private property. And then that ring of private property, if we zoom out even further, is also surrounded by private property. So
you've got sort of concentric circles.
Yeah, you could look at it that way. If you colour them all different colours, you would end up just having bigger donuts surrounding smaller donuts, surrounding smaller donuts. Would they all have? How would we deal with that?
I would say each time somebody makes one of these donut homesteads, they have to have an easement over that homestead. So this would go all the way down until we get to the very center, and somebody would homestead that, right?
Right. I'll need to read the paper, but I'm going to come back to you on that one.
Right.
Because I'm also way too hungover to fucking go over that. Sorry for the swearing.
That's fine. I'll also send you, whilst you're at it, an article by Kinsella on the latecomer ethic and why it's not valid. Because that might at least help you better clarify your disagreement with it. Because I think he'll do a better job of explaining it than me, perhaps.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. So we've seemed to come to this point. We've sorted that out. Let's go over our tribes again. So, in our debate, I brought up this idea of someone popping a rock in the middle of the UK. Let's say they're in Nottinghamshire, and they say the UK is the UK is unoccupied. By the way, for those who didn't see the debate, the UK is unoccupied. A guy pops a rock in the middle of the UK and says the UK is one great big art piece. I am using the whole of this island. I suppose the UK wouldn't exist. The whole of this island as my great big art piece. Anyone who steps on it is a latecomer, and I will shunt you off with my pike and use lethal force to keep you off my piece of art. And we can't. We were sort of inconclusive on that one. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems to me if he is genuinely using the entire UK, all power to him, right?
Can he genuinely be using the UK?
Well, it gets into what actually counts as occupancy, I suppose, which is a little bit blurry, I'd say. If he is, then, yeah, he is the first possessor. If he isn't, maybe he isn't, right? But this gets into sort of, difficult questions of what actually counts as occupancy for something. And I've not found anything satisfactory on, well, what actually counts as occupancy. Is this enough, or is it not enough?
We have our continuum problem, don't we? So, like with use, could I homestead? Could I build a house in the middle of some uninhabited plain? There's hills, there's rivers. It's a very beautiful landscape. I build a house. I've got a window, and I say, right, my view. I'm looking out, and I'm using this view in front of me. Gives me great value. It adds value to my home. Would that count as homesteading?
I think potentially not, right? Because if we imagine it's like your neighbor's house, and you really like the look of your neighbor's house because he's painted it yellow, and you really like yellow, but then he paints it purple one day, and it's like, oh, well, I really liked it when it looked yellow, right?
Yeah.
That it's changed, but I mean, you didn't actually own his house, right? It was his house.
Yeah.
He's allowed to.
Yeah.
He's allowed to. This is basically the public goods argument, and public goods are entirely subjective things. There is no objective public good, right? Because I might like my neighbor's yellow house, so it would be a public good to me, and a public bad if he painted it purple. But I'm not entitled to not have these public bads imposed on me because it's other people's property.
Although this analogy would be, the guy living up in the opposite house would be the latecomer to a home that is being painted by the homeowner. Whereas if I built a house in the middle of nowhere, and I said I built my house specifically here for the view, I have now homesteaded the view. Anyone who wants to build a house on the hilltop is a latecomer, damaging my view. Could he enforce that property title?
I think probably not, but maybe there is some justification in there for that. It depends. I would say you are using whatever you're actually potentially implementing as a means to some end, and just engaging in the consumer's good of having a nice view. I'm not sure that counts as using the hill as a means towards some
Yeah.
end. So I'd say probably not. And maybe
Yeah,
it's
okay.
also the case with the. I suppose I probably need to read more on praxeology to understand what exactly counts as implementing something as a means.
That's fair enough. So I think we'll probably both agree then that use can't be as nebulous as, or we'd likely agree that use can't be as nebulous as just looking at something or,
But
well,
sometimes it can, certainly, right? Because I'm just looking at my
potentially if
monitor.
it's, yeah, but I'd say with your monitor, there's still regular physical manipulation. So you have to turn it on, you maintain it, you clean it sometimes. I hope. Um, you still manipulate your monitor. Right? But if I to say I'm looking at that mountain outside, I'm not maintaining the mountain. I'm not. I'm just saying I like that mountain. I'm not using it in the way that I would consider gives you a property title to it.
I'd say the difference there would be that my monitor is definitely a capital good of some order, right? Because I use it for, making video content on YouTube and shit like that. So it's definitely a capital good there. Whereas I'm not sure that the mountain would be a capital good.
Could like
Yeah,
imagine if I took
it would
if I if
definitely
I
be a consumer's good, right? Because you're not using the mountain to produce other things. You're just basking in its glory, right?
I could I could take pictures of the mountain or draw pictures of the mountain and use it as my reference point, and then sell on those photographs and pictures. That to me would then become a capital good.
Suppose so. Yeah, I think I just need to read more about praxeology to get back to you on that.
Fair enough. So, and so it's not as nebulous as just looking at the thing. Well, that's my position. It needs to be based on physical, direct. And I used the word intimate. He didn't like that word. Intimate use of a thing. Well, I say intimate. It sounds like a silly word, but it's like it's the difference between owning your home where you live. It's your place of residence versus the spade you threw onto the desert 30 years ago. There's a lot less intimacy. Like if someone picked it up, there's a lot less emotional harm done to you. I'd say that factors into it. Again, I understand that these are subjective qualities, and they're not. It doesn't give us an incredibly clear answer on what these property rights should be. But it doesn't. I don't think that's an argument to say we should drop it all and then have it all to be absentee owners eternally. For example, my mate gave me a pretty good question similar to this. It's like, what is the correct penalty for murder? Is it 20 years? Is it 50 years? Is it death? Is it torture? And we'll probably say, look, torture for the rest of his life is too much. And we'll probably say 5 seconds in prison is too little. There's a sweet spot. But I don't think there's an objective answer to where that sweet spot is.
I think there is, right? Both imprisonment and torture. They are simply different sorts of punishment than the actual punishment that he has demonstrated he is fine with receiving, which is being killed. He has demonstrated that he thinks it's fine to kill people. So therefore, the just retribution is to kill him in response.
Okay, that's interesting. Can I kill him brutally?
You can kill him in however manner he killed the person who I suppose you were related to, right?
So he shot my neighbour with an arrow, we shoot him with an arrow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Interesting.
And
how about
you can also negotiate different sorts of punishments. Let's say he doesn't want to be killed, and you're like, right, well, I'll agree not to kill you if in exchange you give me $10 million, right? Let's say he's really rich. And you can agree, right, okay, you'll cede the right of retribution to me, so I will be allowed to retribute against myself however I want, but in exchange, I'll trade to you $10 million, right? Something like that. And that would be a
Right.
genuine contract.
I think that'll just kick the idea of what is the just penalty into whatever the Punisher decides.
Well, the absolute just penalty
is.
is whatever is implied via retribution, proportionality, right? That would be the absolute just punishment. But you can negotiate for a different type of punishment if that's what you want to do, right? That's absolutely fine. But it's definitely going to be the case. Yeah, let's say this guy just doesn't want to negotiate over any other punishments. Then you know that you can definitely kill him. You can definitely punish him in that way.
Okay. How about punching? Like, how about assault? So if I punched you, you take me to court. Would you say just punching me back is enough?
That would be just.
And could you go further than that?
Sorry?
Could you do more than punch me? Could you give me 5 years in prison?
Well, that would be different. I'm not comfortable saying that one is more or less than the other. Right? I don't think there's any way to define that properly. I could put you in prison for 5 years if you agreed to that, right?
Right.
And that would be conditional. If you don't agree, then I know that I can definitely punch you back. That would be just.
So, but then would you say the punching back is that? Well, let's say that I punch you. I'm a big bulky dude. I'm not in real life. I'm not very sporty.
Yeah. I'm like really wimpy. I can't punch very hard, but you can punch super hard, like you're a boxer.
Yeah.
I could hire. I could essentially hire a champion to punch you back, right? Somebody who could punch, as hard as you could punch, right? Yeah, that you're like a boxer guy. I could hire a boxer who would be able to really lay into you.
Right. And because I'm a boxer, I know how to position myself, take the blow less. So, the point I'm trying to make here is I don't think just punching you back would be is a good limit to what you can do to the person. So,
but it is a limit that we arrive at from analysis of natural law, though. So, I mean, you might not like it, but the universe doesn't have to give you things that you like, right? We just know that is the just maximum based on a stopple.
That's an interesting point. So, the universe shouldn't give you things that you like.
Or rather, it isn't obliged to, right? The universe isn't obliged to make it such that everything aligns with your personal preferences on how things should be done. It's just the logic of the law tells us that proportionality is retribution plus restitution. We haven't, unless you can figure out something other than that, which would be just in punishment theory. But I've never heard of it.
So when it comes to legal systems, and I'm going to talk about positive law, social law, and stuff, rather than natural law, because I assume your position is that you want social law to align with natural law, right?
Rather than I don't think social law is law at all. I think there is only natural law, and I don't think law is made at all. I don't think it's possible to create a law. I think we discover laws, just as you can't create a law of physics.
Yeah. Interesting. So, in what way are these natural laws? So, for example, you compare it to the laws of physics. I can't ignore the laws of thermodynamics. Like, I can't ignore the laws of motion. But humanity has ignored Rothbardian natural law for a very long time, and it's likely, I think, that it will continue to do so. Now, it's certainly possible that Rothbardian society could come about. Now, in what way then is it a law if we can just ignore it?
It's a normative law, so you're physically able to violate normative laws, but you'd be unjust in doing so, i.e. you ought not violate these normative laws in an objective way, in fact. It's objectively wrong for you to do this, and you cannot possibly justify doing it. It's a bad thing to do, right? But you're still able to do it, which is what makes it different to physical laws. This is why natural law is a normative rather than a physical science.
Okay. Fair enough. And what you're saying is the laws that you want to align with natural law. Well, I assume you want a legal system of some form.
I want a. I'll rephrase that. I want a system of right enforcement which aligns with natural law. Because I don't think we would be creating laws, right? I think we would be simply enforcing them, and I want the enforcement of law to align with natural law.
Yeah, so we're going to come up with some socialized utility of declaring what the rights are, if whether or not we're making them or not. Declare what the rights are, and we say we're going to enforce them. For that to even happen, for that to exist, people need to value them in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
People have to want to do it. So when you say the universe doesn't give you what you want, and it ought not to give you, it shouldn't have to give you what you want. For your political views to be viable in any shape or form, it's going to have to appeal to someone.
I think ethics appeals to everybody. Everybody is faced with the problem of how do we go about living life. You know, everybody's faced with the problem of conflicts. So everyone's faced the problem of, okay, how do we resolve these conflicts? How do we deal with conflict, right? Everybody's faced with this problem because we're beings faced with the issue of scarcity. This appeals to everybody. If you don't care at all about ethics, die, reduce the problem by one, right?
That's fair enough. It's fair enough that ethics itself is necessary. But it's to me, ethics is a code for action to help you live a valuable life, a life which you want to hold on to. And with that comes hypothetical imperatives. It's a little bit like Ayn Rand's system. It's not. There's massive deviations. So Ayn Rand would say, for example, these are the actions that help you live a more valuable life, and these are the laws that will foster that. And so that's where she gets the right to life from. That's where she gets her oughts from. You ought not to condone murder, because then you'll be murdered yourself eventually, and that's not a good thing. You contradicted your aims, your values, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think I agree with that as a brief overview. The specifics I disagree with quite a lot. That's all I agree with Ayn Rand on, and then the rest is just I'm effectively a socialist, and she's pretty far off to the right.
Well, yeah. So
what would you say to that?
Well, natural law is basically applying ethics to the issue of conflict, right? So conflict is a possibility. So how do we deal with conflict, right? It's a subset of ethics. You know, ethics is talking about we have life. So how should you live, right? And then there are many subsets of this. You know, how should you drink your tea, right? That's part of life. So how should you go about drinking your tea? Should you snort it up through your nose, or should you pour it over your balls, right? You know, shit like that. You can apply ethics to many, many different areas of life. And law is applying it to the issue of interpersonal disputes, you know, conflicts.
And I would say the system of the... How am I going to word this? The code or conflict resolution, as in what defines conflict resolution and what is just conflict, just as in justifiable conflict resolution, will have to appeal to people's values. So if we go back to the Britain being an art piece example again, and now we've got, in our debate, I said there's people setting up villages on the island after the rock had been plonked in the middle of it. All those people who are living on that land and they've turned that land into their home, or into their living space, or a space in which they live, even if it's not theirs, as you'll say, I'd say they have no reason to respect the property wishes of the artist. Because he's saying, right, you need to pack up your entire community and get the fuck off the land. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is you could never hope to justify conflict initiation. So if you're doing something which is initiating conflict, you can't justify it. You're being unethical.
Mm-hmm.
So you objectively shouldn't live in that way, given that it's unethical.
So, okay, why it's unethical according to that standard of ethics?
This is a standard of ethics which was derived from something undeniable, i.e. conflict avoidance. This is where we can get into argumentation ethics. You could not propose a conflict initiatory ethic without contradicting yourself. So therefore, conflict avoiding ethics have to be correct.
Mm-hmm. That brings us back to a problem on my accusation of circular reasoning, which was the conflict avoidance is itself determined by property rights.
Well, it's not. Property rights are determined by conflict avoidance. It's the other way around.
Yeah, and then it goes back on itself because we say, what does conflict avoidance look like? But we've gone through that, and you've made your point, I made mine, and I can't articulate it any further. I would just say the islanders, the villagers on the island, are not affecting this guy in any material shape or form. They're just living their life 300 miles away, and he's just sat there with his rock. For him to then go down to the island and say, right, pack up your shit and leave, they say no, because we've been living here now for a few years. They will very naturally defend their right to stay, and we've agreed that it could escalate up to lethal force. He ends up massacring these villagers. He stood there, covered in their blood with a knife, and he said, "Oh well, Rothbard said I'm justified in doing this." Is this really a sane code of ethics here? Is this one
absolutely.
that we want to?
If we're assuming that it is indeed just proper possession to place the rock down, if we're assuming that, then there would be initiation of conflict for anybody else to come in as a latecomer, right? And anything else, if we try to propose the contrary, we'd contradict ourselves. And we know, because of the law of non-contradiction, the negation of that, therefore, has to be true. So we know it has to be the case that you're unjust in initiating conflict. You are wrong to try and do that.
And my position would be then, the property right in the first place was not just.
Well, that's a contradiction, because property rights are defined as something which are just possession.
Okay, if you want to be... Well, Rothbard didn't look at it that way, because in the Ethics of Liberty, he talks about a distinction between property owned by criminals and property owned by non-criminals.
I mean, we have advanced beyond Rothbard.
So Rothbard was wrong.
He was wrong about many things.
That's interesting. So yeah, okay. So you disagree with that then?
Yeah, because I don't think ownership is the right way of talking about it. I don't think the criminals own the property. I think they simply possess it.
Okay. Well, I'll rephrase my stance. The property claim of plopping the rock on the island and owning the island wasn't justified. That's my position on it.
But on what grounds?
On the grounds that property ought to be based on use and occupancy.
But why?
Because people need to use and occupy things in order to live, and property is limited to that.
So is life affirmation the core of your theory of law then?
Life affirmation. Life defense.
what
So-
what makes that a better core than something undeniable like conflict avoidance?
Undeniable.
Yeah, you cannot deny conflict avoidance without contradicting yourself.
Well, if I was to just do what you do and say it's based on the just possessor, then I'll just say, well, actually, the artist is initiating the conflict by massacring the villagers.
But why? And
Because
how does
because
this
the
tie
property right
into
in the first
life
place.
affirmation, right?
Because the property right in the first place wasn't property claim. Sorry, wasn't justified. Why the hell is a cat back in here? Give me a second. I swear he's evolved to the point he can actually open doors. I remember shutting that door. It's scary. I'm genuinely scared of my cat. Right. Because, as I've said before, it's based on things that you need to further your life, to continue living.
Right, but what makes that the better core then? Because I mean, the law isn't about simply living in general, right? It's about how to deal with conflicts. It's not all of ethics. It's specifically ethics applied to, like, the just use of force. When it's dealing with these conflicts over scarce means. That's what the law is there to solve. It's not saying how should you live in general.
The laws would be those which are necessary to allow people to live in general, right? So that's where the right to life will come from, rather than
The laws aren't how to live in general, though. That's ethics. Law is a subset of ethics.
the laws. Well, I know you say social laws aren't laws at all. I say law is a social norm which is enforced by some means or another. Those are going to be the social norms which are necessary, the enforcement of social norms which are necessary to allow a person to live a happy and free life.
But that's the thing, when you're talking about enforcement, you're talking about conflict there. So there's some conflict over how, to use some scarce means.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying, right, how do we deal with this conflict? Right, we're back to conflict here. It's not about how to live in general, right? Law doesn't apply to a single man alone, with nobody else around. Law only applies when there are other people, interpersonal conflicts. Whereas ethics still applies to a single man who has nobody else.
Ethics, yeah, okay. But I agree with that. But the ethics about interpersonal relationships will justify laws, will lead to normative laws. And those laws come back to this idea of value, having value for your own life. And then we can talk about which laws will facilitate it.
Right? If the law, like, this is what I'm saying, if the law is dealing with how to live, then what's the difference between law and ethics? Right? Law would, of course, have to be in accordance with ethics because it's a subset, but law isn't ethics. Right? It's not the same thing.
Yeah, you're right. It's a subset. Law is specifically the social norms which are enforced in a community.
Right, which is just a worse way of saying it's ethics applied to the issue of interpersonal conflict.
I mean, you can prefer to say it that way. That's perfectly fine.
Right, so like they are analogous then, right?
Analogous.
So, like, would you agree that law is ethics applied to the issue of interpersonal conflicts?
Not just specifically conflicts.
What else does law apply to?
I think. Fair enough. Yeah, it would imply conflict. Yeah.
Right, but and nothing else.
Hmm?
And
Not
nothing
that I can
else.
think of at the moment.
Right, yeah. So therefore, simply looking for life affirmation as the root of your theory of law, that's not right, because that's the root of ethics, not law, and law is only applying to interpersonal conflict. So interpersonal conflicts, how to deal with those, has to make up the core of your theory of law.
But the law is itself a subset of ethics.
Yeah.
Legal codes and
So it
the
would have to be in
application of ethics.
accordance with life affirmation. I agree there, but that doesn't mean it makes up the core. Because if we have that as the core, then we're applying law to all sorts of things which aren't to do with interpersonal conflicts.
I think it seems to me that you're basing your political views just on what sounds nice. That's not a good way of putting it. I don't know. I've lost the thought. Look, I'm gonna have to go in a bit because I've got work in the morning, and I'm gonna let this run until, let's say, 11 latest.
I mean, I'm kind of wanting
Okay.
to go to the toilet now, so I suppose we could end it here.
Yeah, we could do. I think of some final words to say. Want to give you a closing statement?
Yep, I don't have anything. I think I've made my case.
Yeah, fair enough. So, I'll make my case. Ethical systems have to be based on appealing to value judgments. Values about your life, values about being allowed to live a happier life. Right? Any legal system that makes my life worse, I'm going to have to reject. I've got no reason to support it. It'll be, as Stirner says, a spook. Why am I supporting this law and making my life worse? If I want to make my life worse, I may as well just die. So when it comes to the people on the island, if we're going to use, we say, oh, this guy is using the island and he is the sole legal user of that island, why should the people who are not affecting him materially, not threatening his life, not even affecting him at all, have their right to life stripped away by a machine gun if he decides to come down and force him off the island? And I'd say, if they were to accept that, then they are being spooked. They're just acting against their own life. They may as well just commit suicide at that point. So they have no reason to do it, and that's why, really, people haven't just cracked Rothbard open and lied it. So and this is ultimately why I don't think anarcho-capitalism will ever come to be, because it just doesn't provide better outcomes for people at all. If you look at the rolling back of any worker's right, you're just handing all power over to corporations effectively. Nobody wants that. You're handing all power to property owners. All power, economic power, even political power in some way. Because the laws of the land is just the rules of the property owners now. Nobody wants it, but I'm too tired and too hungover to fully go into that. And I know that sounds like I'm just leaving a massive dump and running off, but I think it's something to talk about again. That specific one, if you want to.
Sure. Anyway, thanks for coming on.
Okay, mate.
Yeah, see ya.
Ta-da, pal. See ya. Taxation's theft.
Indeed. Go away. See ya. Boop.